Addict C asks a question. What is the difference between buying random playing cards like Pokemon or Magic that you have no idea what the box contains and loot crates? Wouldn't this be gambling? Arguably, a lot of things that we do would be considered gambling. You have to understand that the way that our legal system works, when there is, first of all, there's no federal prohibition when it comes to gambling. Gambling is pretty much whatever the state say it is. And when the federal government looks at it, it basically says gambling is however it's defined by the state. And when the states look at it, they pretty much are defining it. Gambling is what we know of as gambling, meaning they are not defining gambling by the properties involved in it, but rather we know that we are putting something up as a bid or as a potential purchase price, meaning you buying something for a chance. There has to be some measure of randomness. It's not a contest of skills of any sort. It's some sort of a random pick for a chance of getting another price, which would have to have some value, right? So those are the basic principles. But there's a lot of things that would fit that and be legal, and a lot of things that would fit it and be illegal. So the laws usually say, when they try to explain what is gambling, they say, well, it looks like this, and they point usually to Vegas. They point to roulette tables, they point to craps table, they point to poker, things like that. Even which leads to interesting offshoots of why some of those games, which are much more, let's say, skill-based game than actually randomly based games like poker, where there's a great deal of skill involved. Yes, there's also randomness, but also a great deal of skill. Why the law still does not recognize them as a legal form of competition, it's largely because all the laws have always been written to say gambling looks like, and then it lists poker among the many things that potentially. So there's no opportunity to say, well, this is really a skills-based game versus random-based game. So the definition of what will be gambling is not very precise, right? So, but we are looking at the concept of paying something for a random chance at winning. Now, this pretty much would, if that was the only definition, it would have covered everything in life. For that matter, it would have covered also investing in the stock market. Yes, there's skill involved, but let's be honest, the majority of the reason why you make any money on the internet is because there's randomness, right? That's really effectively the economic theory behind the stock market, is the random walk, that you really don't know from moment to moment what it's going to be. So there are legal exceptions to that. And over time, the law developed different legal exceptions, not only based on things that the government thinks we need, like investment, and things that the government wants, like it wants to allow you to effectively gamble and use your money to finance, let's say, education. So it provides you with lotteries on a state-by-state basis. It's just pure gambling, but it allows it because it wants to allow it. And then there are a lot of things that the law creates exceptions for because we got used to it over time. A very common thing, for instance, would have been fantasy sports. For all practical purpose, fantasy sports would be completely and utterly illegal, except that there's a recognition that it became effectively, if it's done in a certain way, it's considered a skills-based game and is as such excluded from the definition of gambling. Now, in reality, what happened here, yeah, you can say it's skills versus random. That's not the reason really why it is. It wasn't if the government actually wanted, it was actually trying to resolve whether or not there's enough skill or randomness in the decision of whether or not somebody wins. It's completely irrelevant. It's because it became so popular and such a mainstay of American culture after a while that there's a recognition that, okay, let's make this legal. And that's really all it is. So why aren't baseball cards illegal gambling? Because it's been a mainstay of American culture and been accepted that as such, it is not going to be considered gambling. Now, there are legal reasons why Pokemon and baseball cards and Magic the Gathering cards are not considered technically legal, but at its heart, it's because we've gotten used to the concept of having to purchase cards. Baseball cards especially have set the stage for this entire, a previous century, to a point where it's pretty much accepted is that if you sell other cards in the same kind of manner as you would baseball cards, that would not be illegal. Effectively, the idea is that when you are selling those cards, you're selling them for face value, right? So I have no idea what a pack of cards actually costs nowadays. I haven't bought one in over 20 years, so I just have no concept of it. But let's say it costs $5. Well, the idea is that that's what it's worth. It's a product and it's worth $5. If there's a more expensive one, like a $10 pack, it's because the material or the information or something about it is going to be worth more. It's going to last longer. It's going to retain its value. They're not selling you the cards under the assumption that you're going to make money. It's not. They're saying that they're not selling you because you're trying to find the valuable card, that you're trying to uncover, a card that's going to be worth 10 times the price of the pack, but rather that they're selling you for $5 the value there. If they were starting to charge for a basic pack, $50, $100, and they couldn't justify it because there's nothing unique about the value of those cards, then you'd get into a point where saying, hold on a second, that might be gambling. I'm trying to, there's a 1 in a million chance of winning a card that has 100 times the value of its face of the pack itself, and that's why they're doing it. But at its heart, that's the legal reasoning. It's why Magic the Gathering is okay, why Pokemon cards are okay. Effectively, the law doesn't recognize them as people are buying them for the value. There is a game component here. In Pokemon, in Magic the Gathering, there's a collectible value to those cards, meaning people just collect them because they like the collectivity of those cards, and there's a game value to them. And they ignore the fact that some people would buy them trying to make money effectively by gambling on trying to get the winning card. And that's the difference here. And we don't have... And when it comes to something like a loot box, the idea is, and you don't live in that world, but the way this works is a tech company comes up with a great new ideas and they go right away to speak to their attorneys. And the attorney's job many times is to find a way to convince whoever is going to look at it down the line that it's legal. The attorney is going to present his client with, these are all the risks of why this might be gambling. Your idea of a loot box must be gambling. But they say, okay, now prepare for a potential lawsuit in the end. And they're going to develop a very big legal opinion of why, if you do it a certain way, this is not gambling. And those legal opinions are very, very expensive. They make a great deal of money by selling those legal opinions, and the attorney is really not liable in the event that the client loses when it comes to those legal opinions. So pretty much what happened here is those loot boxes were proposed to law firms. The law firm wrote legal opinions, and those legal opinions pretty much say the same thing here, because I've seen this many, many times in the past. The legal opinion will say is, you've got to match the price to the value of it. Meaning, you've got to tell them that if they're buying a $5 loot box, the value of the minimum value they're going to get out of the loot box is at least $5. So what they do is that say, well, they create artificial prices for those digital products within the loot box. Say each one is worth $5, so the minimum you can win is $5. So it's not going to be a gamble if I'm paying $5 for a chance at winning something that I can never lose, because whatever I'm going to get is at least worth $5. So that's how the legal opinions justify it. The reality of it is that even if it was true that the real value of those elements, the digital elements, were $5, and many times it's not. It's just artificial pricing telling you that it's worth $5, but it's not worth anything. It's just another gun that nobody cares about. It has no particular value. Another skin that doesn't really have any real value, has no tradable value, but it's artificially maintained to say that it's worth $5. But it's almost not the point here, because there's certain reality that happened here that kids have become, because it was presented to children and it was very addictive for children. And I've spoken about it many times on this channel, how I saw that in my own family, where my son is now 15. At that point, a few years ago, so we can, probably 3-4 years ago, got completely into the whole loot box and would just borrow money constantly until we finally figured out what was going on here. Why is he keeps buying here? And he was convinced that if he were to buy those loot boxes, he would make money, and then he would eventually find something of value, and then he would feel that he was cheated because somebody else on some third-party website cheated him out of his money or didn't pay him. There was a real attraction to kids, and so now you're getting into a point where even if we could have said that this would have passed, it garnered such terrible PR that there's almost no chance of it being considered in the same way that baseball cards, Pokemon, and Magic the Gathering. It's on its own, seeing as something that has been targeted at children. It's been something that trying to exploit children, and as a result, it's something that's going to be looked negatively on. And it's not just in the United States. Obviously, it's in Europe, where there's at least 2 countries that passed laws opposing it. There's some laws being proposed in U.S. states against it. And it's the reality that the greed of the gaming companies, where they basically were undermining the gaming components in their own games in order to make more and more money, to try arguably to keep the price of the games down to attract more children, but then use this component through loot boxes to try to drive up the in-game revenue that they were making. It's that greed, especially when pointing at children, that's going to be the reason why it's going to be illegal, why it's not going to be looked upon the same way as baseball cards or even something like fantasy football. Had it been something that had some sort of an age gate to it, some way of actually determining, and I don't know if that could have eventually been possible, but if there was a way to only target adults with it, this is something probably that we would still be seeing nowadays. But it just has such terrible PR that the chance for it is non-existent.
When the lights are out and you stumble in the dark, you kept pushing on, but then you went too far. When your ship has sailed and all your dreams are lost, everything is wrong, you feel like it's your fault.